The desert had always been both a cradle and a crucible. The Apache knew it better than anyone. The way the mesas caught the last red light of evening, the way the air cracked with heat by noon and froze before dawn. To survive here meant learning. To bend with the land, not fight against it. Yet for years, fighting had become second nature. Skirmishes with soldiers, raids on settlers' wagons, reprisals that came like clockwork, it all weighed heavy on the shoulders of Chief Nantin was not yet an old man, but war-aged a man faster than years. His people looked to him for guidance, for leadership, for strength. He had given them all of it, but each victory brought only another loss. A brother cut down, a child starving, a mother's tears. For the Apache, survival was victory enough. But Nantin knew survival alone would not sustain them forever. They needed new ways to build bridges, not just burn them. That was why, when the traders at the dusty frontier post whispered of an arrangement, Nantin listened. The settlement lay on the edge of Apache country, a ragged collection of timber buildings that stank of whiskey, sweat, and horse dung. It was a place where cultures clashed and bargains were struck, often in blood but sometimes in coin. The traders, ever hungry for profit, had long since learned that peace, even fragile peace, was good for business. And so one of them, a grizzled Scotsman named MacCallum, offered an unusual suggestion. There are settler families, Chief, MacCallum had said in his guttural brogue, leaning across a barrel that served as a table. They're poor, worn thin by the land. One of their daughters might be wed to you. Not taken, mind you, but wed proper. Think on it. A bond by marriage, not by war. At first, Nantin bristled. The Apache did not barter women like cattle. But the idea lodged in his mind. A wife from the settler's side could serve as more than companion. She could be a bridge. If treated with respect, she might ease the fear settlers carried like a second skin, and in time, her kin might soften too. It was a gamble, but one worth the risk. So word was sent. A family named Dawson, struggling farmers from Missouri who had pushed westward with little to show for it but dust and hunger, were approached. They had 2 daughters, it was said, the elder Rebecca, known for her quiet nature and sense of duty, and the younger, Clara, wild as a colt and stubborn as a mule. Their father, desperate for security, considered the offer. If one daughter married the Apache chief, his family might be spared raids, given protection, perhaps even prosper under the shadow of the arrangement. Rebecca was the one chosen. She did not weep or wail when told. She merely pressed her lips into a thin line, nodding as though she had expected no better fate. Clara, however, stormed from the cabin, vowing that no sister of hers would be handed over like a sack of flour. But her protests were drowned beneath the grind of wagon wheels being made ready. For his part, Nantin prepared as a warrior would for battle. He gathered gifts, blankets woven with tribal patterns, beads of turquoise, a stallion with a coat black as night. To him, this was no mere purchase. It was a statement of intent. The woman who came to him would not be a captive, nor a trophy. She would be honored, protected, treated as one who carried both her family's trust and her people's future in her hands. Still, doubt gnawed at him. Would a settler woman ever look at him and see more than the painted enemy? Would she understand? The weight he bore, the scars that came not from vanity but from duty? Or would she sit silent and afraid, a reminder every day of how wide the canyon yawned between their 2 worlds? When the time came, the wagons rolled out under the pale dawn sky, carrying with them not only Rebecca's fate but the fragile hope of peace. Dust plumes rose behind the wheels, curling like smoke signals across the desert plain. At their head rode men with rifles slung across their backs, ever watchful. Inside one of the wagons, Rebecca sat stiff and silent, hands folded tightly in her lap. Clara sat beside her, eyes blazing, jaw clenched, as if daring the very earth to stop her from intervening. Far off, atop a ridge, Nant and Lupa watched them come. He saw not just a bride approaching, but the turning of a page in the long, bitter story between his people and theirs. Whether that page would hold peace or more blood, he did not yet know. But he knew this much: the decision had been made, and destiny rode on the wagon wheels. The Dawson wagon creaked and groaned across the desert floor like an old man's bones. Each rotation of its iron wheels raised puffs of dust that clung to hair, clothing, and skin until every traveler wore the same powdery mask. The oxen strained against the harness, their sides flecked with foam, while the men walking alongside them muttered curses at the sun. The journey had already stretched longer than the Dawsons had expected. Though the trading post was not impossibly far, the desert turned distance into ordeal. The wind whipped without warning, filling eyes with grit. Water was precious and always rationed. At night, coyotes yipped just beyond the circle of the campfire, their voices like laughter at the weakness of men. Rebecca sat in the wagon's shade, hands folded over her lap. Her bonnet shielded her from the worst of the sun, but not from the ache of fear that had settled in her chest. She thought often of the stories told about the Apache raiders who struck without warning, warriors who painted themselves for battle and gave no quarter. It was one thing to hear such tales as gossip around a Missouri hearth. It was another to be driven toward them with the certainty of becoming bound to their leader. Each jolt of the wagon made her stomach turn. She tried not to show it for her. Father's eyes were on her often, searching her face for cracks. He had spoken little since they set out, but when he did, it was with a grim resolve. "You'll be treated fair," he said more than once, though his tone carried doubt. "Better this than starvation. Better this than war." Clara, however, did not share her father's resignation. She refused to sit silently like her sister. Each day she found reason to challenge the plan, sometimes in whispers to Rebecca, sometimes in shouts directed at her father. "They're sending you off like a sack of cornmeal," she hissed one night as they lay under the wagon, wrapped in thin blankets. And for what? To spare a few cows from being stolen? To keep Pa's plow in the ground a season longer? "You're worth more than that, Becky." Rebecca turned her face to the stars, unwilling to meet her sister's eyes. "It's not about worth, Clara. It's about survival. Maybe if I do this, the rest of you won't have to fear them anymore." "Fear them?" Clara spat, low but fierce. "I'd sooner fear the sky falling than give myself to a man I don't know, let alone one they say has blood on his hands. I won't stand by and let them take you." Her sister's words burned hot in the air, but Rebecca remained quiet. Deep inside, she shared the same dread. Yet where Clara saw only injustice, Rebecca saw inevitability. The land was cruel, and choices were few. The wagon train wound onward. The settlers they traveled with cast wary glances at the sisters. Some pitied them. Others whispered that the Dawsons were mad to offer a daughter to the Apache. But none spoke openly. Everyone knew that out here, survival was bought by hard bargains. One afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, a storm rose suddenly out of the west. Sand whipped through the air in blinding sheets, stinging skin and choking lungs. Men shouted, women cried out, children clung to their mothers as the wagons lurched and groaned. The Dawson wagon nearly tipped, but Clara scrambled to the front, grabbing the reins with both hands. She fought the oxen with all her strength, hair plastered against her face, until at last the storm passed as swiftly as it had come. Rebecca reached for her sister then, gratitude softening her fear. But Clara only tightened her grip on the reins, her jaw set. "See? We can survive this without them. We don't need to sell you like a prize cow." Despite the younger woman's defiance, the wagons pressed on. Each mile drew them closer to the appointed place, the meeting ground where the Apache chief would be waiting. Rebecca's dread grew heavier with every passing day, but Clara's determination hardened alongside it. At night, when the campfire burned low, Clara sat awake long after the others slept. She watched the stars, her mind racing with plans. If her family thought they could hand over her sister without a fight, they were mistaken. When the time came, Clara promised herself she would act. Whether by word, by trick, or by sheer defiance, she would not let Rebecca step off that wagon into the arms of a man she did not choose. The desert stretched endless before them, vast and silent, but the sisters carried within them storms more dangerous than any sand gale. And soon enough, those storms would break. The wagon wheels squealed as the train rolled to a slow halt on the edge of a wide basin. The sun was sinking, throwing long spears of light across the desert floor, gilding the scattered sagebrush and the towering red cliffs beyond. It was a lonely, solemn place, chosen carefully for its distance from settlements and soldiers. Here, there would be no interruptions. Rebecca's heart hammered in her chest as the wagon lurched to its stop. Her father climbed down first, brushing dust from his trousers with trembling hands. He glanced back at her with a look that tried to be firm, but his eyes betrayed the doubt gnawing at him. He was delivering his eldest daughter into a future he could neither predict nor guarantee. The other settlers kept their distance. They gathered in small clusters, murmuring behind their palms, but none stepped forward to interfere. They understood well enough that this moment was dangerous. One wrong move, one spark of disrespect, could ignite into something none of them could control. Rebecca lifted her bonnet from her head, her fingers fumbling at the ribbon. The air felt suddenly heavier, hotter, as though the desert itself pressed down on her. She tried to rise, but her knees buckled. Her hands gripped a wagon side, white-knuckled. Then Clara's hand touched her arm. "Don't," Rebecca whispered, her voice brittle, but Clara's eyes burned with a defiance that no whisper could smother. "You don't want this. I can see it in your face. I won't let them push you into it." Before Rebecca could protest, Clara swung herself down from the wagon in one graceful, determined motion. Her boots struck the hard-packed earth with a thud that carried across the basin. She straightened her back, squared her shoulders, and marched forward as if she had always been the one intended for this fate. Gasps rose from the settlers. Rebecca's father's face went ashen. "Clara!" He barked, but his voice cracked with shock. The Apache riders appeared then, as if conjured from the very stones. They had been watching from the ridges, shadows against the fading light. Now they descended with silent precision, horses moving as one, their long hair whipping in the wind. At their head rode Nantin, tall and broad-shouldered, his face unreadable beneath the streaks of ochre paint that marked him as leader. He reined in his horse, studying the girl who stood before him. His dark eyes narrowed not in anger, but in careful consideration. This was not the woman described, the quiet and dutiful one. This one radiated fire, chin lifted, gaze unflinching. Rebecca, still frozen in the wagon, tried to rise, her lips parting to explain, to undo her sister's reckless choice. But no words came. She could only watch as the two locked eyes, her fiery sister and the battle-hardened chief. Clara's heart pounded, but she refused to let it show. She met Nantin's gaze with the full force of her will. "I am the one you came for," she said, her voice steady. "If you mean to take a bride, then here I stand." The words stunned her father, horrified Rebecca, and silenced the murmuring settlers. But Nantin gave no immediate reply. He dismounted with a slow, deliberate grace, his movements unhurried, controlled. He approached Clara until the space between them was measured only in breaths. He looked down at her, reading her like one might study an unfamiliar map. She was smaller than he, yet her spirit seemed to fill the air. At last he gave a single nod. "So be it," he said in English thick with accent but clear in intent. Rebecca let out a choked sound, half plea, half protest. But Nanton's gaze flicked toward her only briefly. If this was a trick, if the settlers meant to insult him by offering another, he showed no sign of offense. He had not asked for a specific face, only for a bond. And perhaps fate had decided the bond would take a different shape than planned. Clara's father staggered forward. "Wait, you don't understand, she isn't." Nanton raised a hand, silencing him. The Apache warriors behind him bristled, their presence a reminder that argument here could turn deadly. Clara's father faltered, his mouth closing, his shoulders slumping under the weight of forces he could not command. Clara's pulse roared in her ears, but she held her ground. When Nanton offered his hand, rough and scarred from years of war, she hesitated only a heartbeat before placing hers. In it was warm, solid, and shockingly gentle as he closed his fingers around hers. The bargain was sealed not with papers, not with signatures, but with the silent consent of two souls who each, in their own way, had chosen defiance. Behind them, Rebecca sank back onto the wagon bench, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to scream, to stop it, to trade places again. But the choice had already been made. Clara had stepped forward, and now the path was set taut as the Apache warriors wheeled their horses, guiding Clara toward their camp. The settlers stood, frozen, unsure whether they had witnessed folly or destiny. For Rebecca, it felt like both. The Apache camp was not what Clara expected. She had imagined something fierce and forbidding, rows of scalps hung as trophies, warriors sharpening blades, women huddled in silence. Instead, what she found was a village alive with rhythm and movement. Children laughed as they darted between the brush shelters. Women pounded maize into flour, their songs weaving through the air. Men returned from the hunt, bearing rabbits and deer slung over their shoulders. Life here was not grim or monstrous. It was simply human. But Clara refused to be softened by what she saw. She had not come willingly, and she would not bow easily. On her first evening, Nanton guided her through the camp. His hand rested lightly at her back, not forceful, but firm enough that the people knew she was under his protection. The Apache watched her with careful eyes, some curious, some suspicious, a few openly hostile. Clara held her chin high, refusing to shrink beneath their gazes. If they thought her afraid, they were mistaken. Inside Nanton's lodge, a large brush shelter lined with woven mats and adorned with feathers and beads, she sat stiffly as he laid out a blanket for her. His every action was deliberate, unhurried, as though he were testing her patience. "You will be safe here," he said finally, his voice calm, deep as the rumble of distant thunder. Clara crossed her arms. "Safe? I've been taken from my family, dropped among strangers, and told I am to be your wife. That isn't safety, it's a prison." Nanton's dark eyes met hers, unwavering. "Not a prison, a bond," she laughed bitterly. "A bond I never agreed to." Silence stretched between them. Outside, the crackle of a fire and the low murmur of voices filled the night. But inside the lodge, the air felt charged, thick with the weight of their unspoken challenge. At last, Nanton said, "You chose to step from the wagon." Clara bristled. "I chose to protect my sister. She was terrified, and I wasn't about to let her be forced into this. That doesn't mean I chose you." For the first time, a flicker of something amusement, perhaps admiration, touched his expression. Then, "You are brave, or foolish, or both." Her jaw tightened. Better a fool than a coward. Nanton's gaze lingered on her a moment longer, then he nodded. "So, brave wife, foolish wife. We will see what you are." The words rankled her. Wife. As if speaking it made it true. Clara drew herself up, taller, her fiery spirit rising. If you think I'll kneel at your feet or jump at your command, you're mistaken. I don't take orders from any man, least of all one who thinks he can barter for women." Instead of anger, Nanton's mouth curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. "Good," he said simply. "A weak woman would not survive here. Strength is better." His calm acceptance infuriated her more than rage would have. She wanted him to argue, to shout, to reveal himself as the tyrant she believed him to be. But he did not. He only studied her as though she were a puzzle worth solving. The days that followed became a battle of wills. Clara refused to eat when food was brought, choosing instead to fetch her own water, grind her own maize, sit apart rather than accept gifts. Nanton did not forbid her. He watched quietly, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with the faintest hint of pride, as she stumbled through tasks she had never done before. When she mocked the way he spoke English, he corrected her Apache words. Instead, patiently, as though she were a child worth teaching. When she demanded to know why his people raided settlers, he spoke of hunger, of broken treaties, of survival pressed into the edge of extinction. His calm explanations disarmed her anger, though she tried to hide it. One evening after she snapped. That she was not his to command, he simply handed her a bow. "Then show me," he said. "If you do not wish to be led, then lead yourself, hunt, provide, prove your strength." Clara took the bow with trembling hands, her pride refusing to let her back down. She failed miserably that first attempt, missing every target, scraping her arm raw with the string. Yet when she returned, shoulders aching and pride bruised, Nanton said nothing of her failure. He only placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Tomorrow better." That quiet confidence unsettled her more than any insult. For the first time, Clara wondered if he truly sought a submissive wife or if he had seen something in her. In that moment she stepped off the wagon, that she had not yet seen in herself. The battle between them had begun, not with violence, but with sparks of will, each testing the other's strength. And though Clara would never admit it, some small part of her thrilled at the thought of a challenge that might, at last, match her fire. The days bled into weeks, and Clara found herself caught between two lives, the one she had left behind on the wagon and the one she now stumbled through among the Apache. At first, every task, every glance, every word spoken in a language she barely understood felt like a test she was destined to fail. But slowly, almost without realizing it, she began to adapt. It was the women who softened her resistance first. They did not treat her like a prisoner, nor did they fawn over her as though she were some prized possession. They regarded her with measured eyes, waiting to see whether she would break or bend. When she attempted to draw water from the stream and spilled half of it down her dress, they laughed not cruelly, but with the easy amusement of women who had once been clumsy girls themselves. When she tried grinding maize and ended up with more scattered on the ground than in the mortar, one of the older women, a grandmother with skin like weathered leather, simply took her hands and guided them in a steady rhythm until Clara found the motion herself. She hated to admit it, but their patience was disarming. She had expected scorn, even hostility. Instead, she found herself being drawn into their circle, their laughter brushing against her like a warm wind. The children, too, crept close. At first they stared at her pale skin and light hair, whispering behind their hands. But soon they tugged at her skirts, urging her to play their games. One boy placed a stick bow in her hand, daring her to shoot at a row of rocks. She loosed the arrow clumsily, missing by yards, and they collapsed into laughter. Something in their joy loosened the knot inside her chest. For the first time since stepping from the wagon, Clara laughed with them. It was Nanton, however, who challenged her most. He never forced her to his side, never ordered her submission. Instead, he offered her opportunities. A place beside him when the men rode out to hunt. a chance to sit with the elders and hear their stories through the halting bridge of his English. Lessons in tracking, in reading the desert's silent signs. Faint print of a rabbit in the dust, the shift of wind across the grasses. Clara resisted at first, her pride pricking at every correction, every reminder that she was the outsider. But she could not deny the thrill of learning, the slow unveiling of a world she had never understood. When Nanton showed her how to notch an arrow properly, his hand steadying hers, she felt a strange warmth, not of embarrassment but of belonging. One evening, as the sun slid low behind the cliffs, painting the sky in ribbons of crimson and gold, Nanton brought her to a rise overlooking the valley. He stood beside her in silence, watching as the shadows lengthened across the land. "This place," he said at last, his voice quiet, "is home. The wind, the stones, the river. My people are tied to it, as your blood is tied to your sister." Clara folded her arms, staring at the horizon. Home? For us, home was never a place. It was the wagon, the road. Always moving, always scraping. By, never safe. He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the dying light. "Perhaps now you will know what it means to have roots." The words unsettled her. She wanted to protest, to remind him she had not chosen this. Yet the thought lingered, sinking deeper than she wished to admit. The night of her first successful hunt sealed something between them. After weeks of practice, she loosed an arrow that struck true, a jackrabbit falling cleanly in the dust. The children cheered, the women nodded with approval, and Clara stood stunned, her bow still trembling in her hands. Nanton approached, his expression unreadable. Then he placed a hand over her shoulder, firm and steady. "Now," he said, "you are one of us." Her throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to laugh it off. But the pride in his voice, the acceptance in his eyes, sent an unfamiliar warmth through her chest. For the first time, she realized she was no longer merely enduring. She was becoming. Still, she fought against the idea with all the stubbornness in her. At night, when she lay awake under the shelter, she told herself she had not betrayed her sister, her father, or her people. She had not chosen this life, it had been forced upon her. And yet, when she remembered the laughter of the children, the guidance of the women, the steady patience of Nanton's hand on hers, a small, dangerous truth whispered inside her heart. The world she thought she hated was beginning to feel less like a prison and more like home. Peace, Clara was learning, was as fragile as a rabbit's heartbeat. For weeks, life in the Apache camp had settled into an uneasy rhythm, hunting, cooking, laughter from the children, the quiet hum of daily survival. She was beginning to see the camp not as a prison, but as a place where she could move, breathe, and even belong. But beyond the circle of brush shelters and firelight, shadows were gathering. It began with rumors. A trader arrived one afternoon, his mule staggering under the weight of packs filled with cloth and tinware. He came smiling, but his eyes darted nervously, his shoulders twitching at every sudden sound. Around the fire that evening, his words spilled out in a low, hurried voice. "Settlers are restless," he told Nanton. "They whisper that the Dawsons betrayed them, sending the wrong girl to wed you. Some say it was a trick, that you were mock chief, that they made a fool of you. Others claim it was part of a scheme to plant a spy among your people." The Apache warriors stirred, muttering. Clara sat stiffly beside Nanton, her face pale in the firelight. The trader leaned closer, lowering his voice further. "And more. Then whispers, there are men gathering rifles, talking of a strike. They say if the Apache want white wives, they'll answer with white bullets." Nanton's expression did not change, but the air around him seemed to tighten like a bowstring. He dismissed the trader with a gift of venison and sent him on his way. But the unease lingered long after the mule's hooves faded into the night. For Clara, the news struck like a thunderclap. The settlers, the very people she had once called her own, were branding her a liar, a trickster, even a spy. She had sacrificed herself to save Rebecca, and still they cursed her name. That night, she lay awake beside the fire, staring at the stars, wondering whether she had cut herself off from both worlds. The threat did not remain only in rumor. A week later, smoke was seen on the horizon, black columns curling above the land where a small hunting camp had been. When Apache riders reached it, they found the shelters burned, the food stolen, and a boy of 12 lying wounded with a musket ball in his shoulder. Clara helped the women tend him, her hands steady though. Her stomach churned. She washed the blood from his skin, listening to his soft groans, feeling fury build inside her. Whoever had done this, they had not struck against warriors, they had struck against a child. That evening, the council gathered. Voices rose in anger, demanding vengeance. Warriors argued that settlers had never honored peace, that only fire could answer fire. Clara sat on the edge of the circle, her heart pounding. She had never spoken in the council before, but now words burst from her. Not all settlers, she said, her voice carrying across the hush that followed. Someone only to survive like you. But others, she swallowed hard. Others will use me as an excuse to destroy everything here. They will call me a trick, a mockery, and they will use it to justify their hate. The warriors turned their eyes toward her. Some glared, others studied her with unreadable calm. Nathan's gaze was steady, weighing her words like stones in his hand. At last, he spoke. You see both sides because you walk between them. Tell us, Clara, if your people come with fire and rifles, what will you do? Will you run back to them? Or will you stand here where you claim a place? Her mouth went dry. The question cut to the heart of what she had been avoiding. She thought of Rebecca's pale face, trembling in the wagon. She thought of her father's haunted eyes and of the settlers' whispers branding her traitor. And then she thought of the boy bleeding in her lap, of the women who had guided her hands at the maize mortar, of the children who laughed when she missed her shots. She drew in a breath, steadying herself. If they come, she said at last, I will not run. I will stand here, because whatever else I am not their spy. And I will not let their hate make me their pawn. The camp fell silent. Then a low murmur of approval rippled through the council. Nathan's dark eyes softened, just slightly, as he inclined his head. But the threat was real, and Clara knew it was only a matter of time before the settlers' fear turned to action. The fragile bridge she and Nathan had begun to build now stood in the crosshairs of war. The desert held its breath, waiting for the first spark. The settlers came at dawn. Clara had woken early, as she often did now, to help the women fetch water from the stream. The first light of day was only beginning to wash the cliffs in pale gold when the crack of a rifle split the air. Birds scattered from the trees, and before her mind could grasp what was happening, a second shot rang out, followed by the thunder of hooves. The women dropped their baskets and scattered toward the camp. Clara froze for a heartbeat, her heart pounding, then turned and ran with them. Dust already churned at the horizon, a column of riders storming toward the Apache village. Their rifles glinting in the rising sun. The camp erupted into motion. Men seized bows and rifles, women snatched children into their arms, the elders shouted warnings. Nathan appeared like a shadow through the chaos, barking orders in his own tongue, rallying his warriors. When his eyes found Clara, she saw both relief that she was safe and a question unspoken. Where will you stand? Fear clawed at her throat. These were her people, the settlers, at least by birth. She had traveled the same wagons, eaten the same meager bread, prayed at the same fires. And yet the riders charging down upon them carried not protection, but hate. They had come not for justice, but for blood. For an instant, Clara saw Rebecca's face in her mind, pale, trembling, resigned. She thought of her father, bowed beneath the weight of hard years. Would they be among the riders now, spitting curses and aiming rifles? Or were they far away, ignorant of the blood about to spill in the desert dust? A child stumbled near her, crying, his small legs unable to keep up as his mother ran. Without thinking, Clara scooped him into her arms and sprinted toward the brush shelters. The boy clung to her neck, his tears wet against her skin. And in that moment, her choice crystallized. These were her people now, the boy. The women who had laughed at her clumsy grinding, the wounded youth she had nursed, the children who tugged at her skirts. Not because she had chosen them in the beginning, but because she had stayed, because she had learned their names, their voices, their lives. Because she had seen their humanity when others refused. She set the boy safely down, pressed him into his mother's arms, then turned to find Nanton. He stood at the camp's edge, bow in hand, calm as stone in the storm of shouts and hoofbeats. Clara ran to him, breathless. "Give me one," she demanded. He glanced at her, unreadable. "One what?" "A bow, a rifle, anything. You would." "Fight?" "Yes," she said fiercely. "If they mean to destroy this place, they'll have to get through me too." For a long, taut moment, he studied her, as if weighing the truth of her words against the danger of placing a weapon in her hands. Then, without a word, he held out a bow. She seized it, not with the grace of a warrior, but with the desperation of someone who had chosen her ground. The settlers charged into range. Shots cracked, arrows flew, the air filled with dust and screams. Clara loosed her first arrow wildly, missing entirely. But she did not stop. She drew again and again, her arms shaking with the effort, her breath ragged. Beside her, Nanton fought with measured precision, his every movement controlled. Deadly, unwavering. At one point, a settler broke through the line, charging straight toward them with a raised rifle. Clara's body moved before her mind caught. Up she drew, loosed, and watched in stunned silence as her arrow struck the man's shoulder, toppling him from his horse. Her hands trembled, horror and pride warring in her chest. But Nanton touched her arm briefly, grounding her. "You stand," he said simply. Before turning back to the fight, the battle raged until the settlers, bloodied and broken, retreated across the plain. The Apache did not pursue far. They knew better than to stretch victory into a trap. Slowly the dust settled, the cries quieted. The survivors gathered. Clara sank to her knees, the bow slipping from her fingers. She stared at her hands, raw and blistered, still trembling from the weight of her choice. She had fired on her own kind. She had shed their blood, but when she looked up and saw the children safe, the women holding one another, the warriors clasping hands in grim relief, she knew there was no undoing it. Whatever blood ran in her veins, her heart had chosen. It sighed. She was no longer simply the girl who stepped off the wagon. She was Clara, who had stood in the fire and refused to run. And though the cost had only begun to show itself, her path was set. The dust settled over the valley, leaving the smell of scorched sage and spent gunpowder hanging heavy in the air. The settlers had retreated, leaving behind overturned wagons and scattered supplies, their shouts fading like echoes over the cliffs. The Apache camp, though rattled, remained intact, its people unbroken. Clara stood among them, her chest heaving, the bow still clutched in her hands. Around her, the warriors tended to minor wounds. The women reassured the children, and the elders murmured words of caution and thanks. She had fought, and she had survived. But more than that, she had proven herself not to the Apache, not even fully to Nanton, but to herself. Nanton approached quietly, his steps measured, and stopped before her. He did not speak at first, simply studying her, taking in the dirt-streaked face, the torn sleeves, the fire still smoldering in her eyes. In that moment, Clara realized she was not merely the girl who had stepped off the wagon. She was no longer the outsider who had feared and resisted. She was part of this place, this people, this life. Finally, Nanton spoke, his deep voice calm yet resonant. You stood when many would have fled. You chose your place. That choice is more than words, Clara. It is a bond. She swallowed, feeling. A mix of exhaustion, relief, and something else, a tentative warmth that she could not yet name. I did what I had to, she said, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. I did it for them, for the children, for this place. Nanton nodded, his dark eyes reflecting both approval and something softer, something unspoken. Then we are bound, not only by words, but by the courage you have shown. You are no longer just a guest here. You are one of us. Clara's lips curved into a faint, tentative smile. She could feel the weight of her journey, the fear, the struggle, the defiance, settling into something steadier, something real. She had been thrust into this life against her will, yet she had forged herself anew within it. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to its rhythm. The Apache repaired the minor damage the settlers had left behind. Clara worked alongside them, grinding maize, tending fires, teaching the children the names of the stars as she had learned them, laughing again at her own mistakes. With Nanton, she practiced hunting, tracking, and the careful craft of survival. Each shared day built trust between them, a quiet acknowledgement that they were partners in both life and protection of their people. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mesas and painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Nanton and Clara walked to the high ridge overlooking the valley. The camp below glowed in the firelight, children laughing, the smell of cooking meat rising on the wind. For a moment, the world felt suspended quiet, vast and safe. Nanton stopped and turned to her. When you stepped from that wagon, I did. Not know what to expect. Fear? Defiance? Rebellion? Clara laughed softly, the sound mingling with the whispering wind. I think I gave you all three. He inclined his head, a small, rare smile tugging at his lips. And yet here you stand, stronger than I imagined, braver than many who were born among us. Her gaze drifted to the valley, to the people who had accepted her despite her foreignness, to the children who clung to her skirts, and finally to Nanton. She realized that her choice, made in fear and defiance, had led her to something unexpected, belonging, partnership, and a life she had never thought possible. Nanton reached out and took her hand. We are bound, Clara, not by fear, not by obligation, but by respect, by courage, and by what we have endured together. Clara squeezed his hand, the words she had once struggled to say now coming naturally. Then we are more than a bond, she said. We are a family. And whatever comes, I will stand with you. The sun disappeared behind the cliffs, leaving the valley bathed in twilight. The fires glowed, children's laughter rang in the air, and the people moved with the quiet confidence of survival. In that moment, Clara knew she had found her place, not the one she had expected, not the one she had feared, but one she had chosen with every act of courage along the way. The girl who had stepped off the wagon had become the woman who stood. In the heart of the Apache world, unafraid, unbroken, and at last home and with Nanton beside her, she understood that the unexpected path, the one forged in defiance, danger, and choice, was the one that had led her to a union stronger than any contract, deeper than any expectation, and truer than she could have imagined.